Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to episode 157 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I take a look at training of third parties under the FCPA, the UK Bribery Act, and other anti-corruption laws. I visit with you about why I think third-party training has become a best practice for a third-party compliance management program. I talk about who needs to be trained in your third parties and how you should train them. I talk about the different types of training, and I try to anticipate some of the questions you might have around instituting training and potential liabilities that you may have going forward. The episode comes in at about 22.5 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I wanted to visit with you about a topic that doesn't get a lot of play. Nevertheless, I think it is an important topic for your best practices compliance program, and certainly one that is moving into the forefront of the Department of Justice and SEC, and that's the importance of training your third parties into your anti-bribery and anti-corruption compliance program under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the UK Bribery Act. Third-party training is an important key to this, to having a best practice compliance program. And unfortunately, in a recent Kaplan and Walker survey, it found that 62% of those companies surveyed did not do third-party training, and only 22% did some training. 16% required training of their third parties. I believe that it's important for organizations to train the third parties, whether they come into a relationship with your company via the sales side or the supply chain. And indeed, in many ways, training your third parties is as important as training your own employees. Both the UK Bribery Act and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act call out third-party training as a part of a best practices compliance program. Training should also be required in several other areas, things like code of conduct, corporate social responsibility, health and safety, human rights, diversity, quality, information. But today I'm going to focus on my specialty, FCPA, and anti-bribery and anti-corruption. The first thing I would like to note is that in two places in the FCPA guidance jointly issued by the Department of Justice and Security and Exchange Commission, issued in November of 2012, it specifically discusses third-party training in the context of the 10 hallmarks of a best practices compliance program. Hallmark number 7, which deals specifically with third parties, says the following. Third, companies should undertake some form of ongoing monitoring of third-party relationships. Where appropriate, this may include updated due diligence, periodically exercising audit rights, and providing periodic training and requesting annual compliance certifications by third parties. And in Hallmark number 5, which deals specifically with training and continuous advice, the guidance states the following. Accordingly, the DOJ and SEC will evaluate whether a company has taken steps to ensure that relevant policies and procedures have been communicated throughout the organization, including through periodic training and certification for all directors, officers, relevant employees, and where appropriate, agents and business partners. So there are two places in the guidance where the Department of Justice has specifically told us, and the Securities and Exchange Commission have specifically told us, that training of third parties is an important component of any best practices compliance program. So the question that I would next pose to you is, which third party should you train? Obviously, third parties who come into a contractual relationship with your company on the sales side present the highest FCPA risk, or at least traditionally have presented the highest FCPA risk. This is because 90 to 95% of all FCPA enforcement actions involve third parties in some way, shape, or form. But in addition to those third parties who may come into a contractual relationship with your company on the sales side, and here I mean distributors, commission sales agents, representatives, joint venture partners, really anyone that does business with you on the sales side of things, and however you may compensate them, they're going to be your highest risk. So you need to take a very, very strong look at delivering a risk management solution, and here specifically FCPA or Bribery Act or other anti-corruption law training to these third parties. But also ask you to consider third parties that come in a contractual relationship with your company in the supply chain. Many companies will enter into a relationship with your company, and they will actually provide government touchpoint services such as freight forwarders, customs brokers, visa processors, those who may procure licenses, tax reporting entities, law firms, anyone that might represent you in front of a government agency that you hire through the supply chain is also, or should be also, considered high risk for the purposes of FCPA training. So it's important, and I think the government, as with all areas of a compliance program, will look to your risk assessment of your third parties to see if there's a rational basis for your delivery of training. This may mean that you could deliver live training to certain third parties, certainly your highest risk third parties. You may deliver a different method or mechanism for a training solution to other third parties based upon a lessened risk assessment or a lower on a risk assessment continuum. It's important that you have consistency in your approach. And by here I mean consistency in your risk analysis and your delivery of a risk solution based upon that analysis, consistency in your training, consistency in certifying your training, and consistency in any results that you may obtain through testing or other mechanisms. So it all starts with a risk-based nature and risk-based analysis, I should say. So from the sales side, think about who may do work for your company. Obviously, a commissioned sales agent or a sales agent who receives something other than a sales commission. All joint venturers and joint venture partners. Anyone in a bidding relationship with your company. So if you're in a joint bidding agreement, this may be enough. What about distributors? And with distributors, what is your analysis of your distributor base? Have you performed a risk assessment of your distributor base to determine if certain distributors are closer to agents, or they are so closely aligned with you in terms of branding, in terms of service delivery, in terms of perhaps servicing of your products, that they have moved closer to being a sales agent? So all of these parties may need to receive the highest level of training. But what about the third parties in the supply chain? Well, I detailed a little bit about those, but I also ask you to consider, what about embedded suppliers? And by here I mean two types of suppliers. There are some companies that bring their supply chain representatives into their companies, into their facilities, because the products, services, or components thereof are so closely aligned with what the US or UK company might be doing that they need to have them as a part of your physical plant and your team. So you also have the situation where you may have embedded your personnel in the supplier. I've represented several companies that make very large, very sophisticated products, and these very large, very sophisticated products require a huge amount of project management, and so the vendors who deliver these very large products, it's not a client of mine, but think of jets or jet engines or components of jets, and trouble Boeing had with the lithium batteries, where they integrated their suppliers into the development and manufacturing process so closely that if you have your personnel embedded with a supplier for QA/QC reasons, then you may have such a close relationship that they become high risk to you for anti-bribery, anti-corruption analysis. What about suppliers who represent your company before governmental entities? In many countries outside the United States, the entity that performs your tax audit may represent you in front of that company, that country's tax authority. So that may bring a level of not only complexity but risk that you typically have not considered from the supply chain side of things. Suppliers with government interactions. You know, I talked about freight forwarders, visa processors, customs brokers, anyone who may be procuring licenses for you. What about zoning? One of the issues that Walmart ran into in Mexico was change of zoning regulations. So do you have people that go to zoning boards and work with zoning boards to make sure that your store or other business establishment is properly zoned? All of those have government interactions, and all of those are folks that you may need to at least consider as high risk for your training. It's important to note that a FCPA violation can, and I repeat, can be sustained through companies in the supply chain. This is because there's two components. One is a bribe or an offer to be bribed. So you don't have to make a bribe, you can make the offer, but also it's to obtain or retain a benefit. So this has been interpreted to be broader than simply a contract. What's a benefit? Receiving a favorable tax ruling, as that's the one case we've seen, a court case was determined to be a benefit. So if your supplier pays bribes to get certain licenses to make products for you, that clearly, or at least clearly in my mind, is a benefit and therefore is covered by the FCPA. So I don't think there's really any question that suppliers can subject you to FCPA scrutiny, if not liability, and that's why you need to consider them for the purposes of training going forward. So what are the mechanisms for training, or what mechanisms are available to you? Well, obviously you can do live in-person training. But there are other mechanisms, and there's a CD-ROM or a DVD, other training that you can purchase. There's computer-based training. There are many vendors out there who do put on computer-based training, and either you can buy a module, you can buy several different modules, you can buy 60-minute training sessions. You can have generic training, you have specialized training, so there's lots of different options available to you. But let me focus on live in-person training, because here I think this is something that you should consider for your truly high-risk third-party representatives, and this is really going to be on the sales side. And I would ask you to consider doing live training if this is the primary method of your sales model for several reasons. One, if it's your primary method of sales, it's obviously your highest risk. Two, by going to a geographic location outside the United States, you drive home a message that your company really puts a high premium on compliance, and they care about it so much that they would send a representative to put on live training. But it also gives you the opportunity to meet with representatives of your third party, their employees, their officers, directors, those working on your account. And this gives you the opportunity to answer questions, develop a personal relationship. All of the reasons that I would advocate that you travel and get outside the United States for your compliance program, or if you're in the law department of your corporation, hold true for training of third parties. And as Jay Rosen would always remind us, you need to consider the local language. The FCPA guidance specifically talks about having your training in a local language. The time they talk about it, it was around employee training, but I think it would be equally important to consider that for your third-party training. So if you have a large third-party sales force in China, you may, or you not may, but you should seriously consider putting on your training in Chinese or translating it to Chinese. The same might be true if you have a large training in other locations. But it's important to not forget the local language. And if you have any questions there, I really suggest you contact Jay Rosen at Merrill Brink. He can help you with all of your translation needs. So perhaps to step back, we should consider why you should put on third-party training. Well, I've talked about it in the context of the FCPA, but I think there's reasons broader than simply FCPA compliance, and it's really some of the following reasons. First of all, if you put on training, it drives compliance into the fabric of your supply chain and your sales chain. One of the concepts from economics is forward and reverse-looking strategies. And reverse-looking strategies, in many ways, portend looking at those in your supply chain. And if you have a reverse-looking strategy which not only contemplates but actually affects change in compliance, that's going to make your company stronger and better and more efficient and do business in compliance with the FCPA going forward. You should have FCPA training as a part of your compliance terms and conditions. It also should be certified. Many people ask, well, how do I know if my vendor has taken FCPA training? Well, I would suggest that you receive a certification from that vendor. Can that be as simple as a sign-in sheet? Yes. Can it also be a certification annually that they've taken training? Yes. Now, can a vendor lie about that, and can a junior to a senior official take training and write up that? Certainly. But a certification is a stop and think control, and that's actually an internal control which you can incorporate into your FCPA compliance program. And I think many people will take that seriously, particularly if they know they need to do that to do business with you. For vendors, however, once they understand that by taking training, it gives them a market benefit and a market differentiator, they're willing to put an hour into FCPA training. And by market differentiator, what I mean is if you're a 1 or 2 or 5 or 10-man operation in India, and you're required to go through FCPA training to work with Nuco Energy Company in Texas, but after you go through that process, you can show that training certification and a copy of that training to another potential customer who may want to use your services. That's a market differentiator, and you've given that vendor something they can use going forward to help demonstrate to other companies that they understand what the FCPA is because of the training you put on. Additionally, you can compel your direct counterparties, who are either vendors or sales agents, to put on training for those subcontractors below them in the chain. And this is a way for you to drive compliance down the not only the fabric of your direct third-party representatives and counterparties, but it allows you to push it down the chain. If you have put on training, it can help you if a reputational attack occurs. Now, we've seen this most recently in the context not of the FCPA, but in general corporate social responsibility programs, particularly in the apparel industry, where there have been several safety incidents and issues out of Bangladesh and other countries which are making U.S. Apparel products. But the same concepts hold true in the anti-corruption world. Next, it really moves you towards a best practices compliance program. Many companies, I think, do not train third parties for the simple reason that they haven't got to it yet. They are training those high-risk employees and putting in the building blocks of compliance, and I think it takes a maturity of your compliance program to get to the training for third parties. Nevertheless, as your program matures and you manage the risks as you manage more risks, I should say, because you go down your chart of risk for your roadmap, moving to training third parties is one of them. And then accountability. This gives you if you document, a method to demonstrate to any regulator who came and comes looking and comes knocking that, number one, you have assessed the risk of third parties. Number two, you have delivered a risk management solution in the context of FCPA training. You have a certification that the third party has taken the training, and then that you have a certification, you have all of that documented together with the training material that you've sent. So I think it can provide accountability to the Department of Justice in the event that you are in any way investigated or even audited. So I want to end with what I think is really one of the great success stories in the context of FCPA third-party training. And this story actually came out back in October of 2009 when Hewlett-Packard announced that they were requiring 155,000 Channel Ops partners to purchase and listen to a 1-hour FCPA training CD. Now, at the time, we didn't know why HP was requiring this. Of course, now we know that they were going through a FCPA enforcement action, or at least an investigation. Nevertheless, I would ask you to consider really the scope of this, 155,000 Channel Ops partners. Now, at that time, HP considered both third-party representatives in the sales side and the supply chain Channel Ops partners. But even with that caveat, that's a huge number. These Channel Ops partners had 1 month to complete the training, and they had to complete the training and certify they completed the training so that they could maintain their status as an HP Channel Ops partner. So for those who say, I've got too many, we can't get it done, I point to the HP as a tangible example that it can be done. Now let me touch upon a couple of issues that inevitably arise when I discuss third-party training. The first is, have you incurred greater liability because you've trained your third parties? Under the FCPA, the answer is absolutely not. Indeed, it actually goes the other way, because this is not some sort of tort liability, civil tort liability scheme where if you take on a closer or greater relationship with your third party, you've moved towards destroying the corporate borders between the two. If you don't train, I think you have greater FCPA liability, and if you don't train, I think you have absolute FCPA liability. So that's one question I'm asked. Second question I am asked is about certification. How do you actually certify that the person who said they took the training actually did? Can they lie on a certification? Well, of course they can lie on a certification. If you're concerned about that, you could require some sort of testing, but at this point, I think a certification is going to be enough. Third is, what if my training is not up to snuff? And will I be criticized for having insufficient, or what if I get training that the DOJ considers not correct? I have to emphasize at this point there has been no enforcement action for people putting on anything less than FCPA training. By that I mean there's not insufficient training, there's not negligent training, there's not incorrect training, there's simply no training. So the key is that there's no enforcement actions involving companies where the training was held to be insufficient, and I don't think there's going to be going forward, at least not for a very, very long time. So those are some of my thoughts on third-party training. I recognize I've gone over a lot of information. So I hope that if you have any questions, you would contact me. I can be reached at tfox at tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Thank you very much for listening.